before there were Europeans, in fact, right? When it was a world that was created by, in many ways, by the sort of the spread of Islam. So this is a map of the world, circa 1500, in terms of world religions, right? So you have Islam, Christianity, in a very generalized way, Hinduism, but mixing with Islam increasingly, Buddhism, and then I think the pink is Confucianism, Taoism, right? But so you can kind of visually see sort of the actually, I mean, this is in terms of like the territorial empires too, but the areas in which Islam is spreading, and it's spreading both on land, but as we talked quite a bit more on Tuesday, around this Indian Ocean world, going all the way to, right, what is now present-day Indonesia, Malaysia, the Moluccas, and so forth. Today, we're basically doing the opposite. We're moving forward in time, starting in a period where we see one of the earliest encounters between Europeans and Asians, East Asians, Central Asians. And as you hopefully got from the reading, from the letters, compared to sort of the terms on which the Portuguese encounter with people in the Indian Ocean starts, things start on quite a different terms, right? When we're talking about the earliest encounter between the Mongols and the Europeans. And speaking of terms, again, I asked you to think through the readings with the paper one prompt in mind. And I want us to do that even as we talk about the readings today. So I just want to remind us, right, the three points. Why were the Europeans interested in Asia? What were the terms of engagements that the Asians set in their interaction with the Europeans? And what does that tell us about how different polities across the globe perceived their place in the world order before the 19th century, before the 1800s? So let's actually tackle sort of this question of sort of why are Europeans interested in Asia? What is their nature of interest in Asia? What is the terms that the Asians set? And what does it tell us about their respective perspective of where they are in the world? Let's actually jump into the very first reading. So the letter between Pope Innocent IV and Guyub Khan. And this image right in the middle here is in fact the Guyub Khan's response to the Pope that's still in, presumably, in the Vatican secret archives in Rome. Written in, this is, what kind of script is this? Is this like, this is a Mongol script, right, I think. I don't, well, actually, no, I think it might be Persian. Persian, I think is what it, yeah. So, let's actually look at Pope's letter first. So this is on page 19 and on to page 20. So what is the Pope's message to the Great Khan?
Yeah. Outwardly, it's attempt a conversion, like become Christian.
Okay.
You know, that's the message they're acting like they're presenting.
So let's say that. So one level of message is that I represent the Holy Catholic Church, right? The Holy Roman Catholic. And I know who's God, and I can teach you, right, about this God. And you might want to follow that God, or else maybe bad things will happen to you, right? What's another level? Do you, Jordan?
Yeah, he's also saying, like, since the Mongols were attacking like the western regions of Europe, he said to like just like stop that pretty much. Stop like attacking, invading Christian regions.
Okay.
At least that's
Yeah, well, let's get a, so what exactly does the Pope want the Khan to stop doing? Sort of, what are the kind of details? Yeah.
Persecuting Christians.
Persecuting, okay, don't persecute Christians. Anything else? Do you get a sense of how far the Khan has gotten into Europe or close to Europe? Where is it?
I think I remember that the Khan destroyed the German army
Okay.
As far as Russia goes.
Very close, yeah.
In the Balkans.
In the Balkans, right? They make it out to the Adriatic. So they're, I mean, well into Europe, right? And this is actually not Guyub Khan, but Batu, one of the grandsons of Chinggis Khan or Genghis Khan, right? One of the person who actually creates the Mongol Empire. We'll get back to that image. So he wants the Khan to stop invading Europe, right? Please don't kill us. So what's the point of the become Christian thing? What do you think? Why do you think that's there in a message that's ostensibly really about please stop invading us, please stop killing us? Why do you think that the Pope throws that in there?
I think ultimately, if the Mongol Empire became a Christian empire, they would have to answer to the Roman Catholic Church, and it would basically be the whole influence over their empire.
Okay, that's a big if, right, from the Mongol perspective certainly, but there is a sense that in fact the Pope, at this time in European history, it has a kind of a primacy over other European monarchs, right, or certainly other presumably Christian monarchs. And so maybe there's a sense that, look, I am above these people, and in a sense I will be above you as well, that's why you should listen to me. Any other thoughts? Does that make sense? Yeah.
They might be using Catholicism as a reason or motive for them to stop attacking.
Okay.
Like
How so?
trying to maybe make them feel guilty about what they're doing in a
Okay.
sense. Or to say that they're wrong.
Yeah, I want to go back to the point, unless you want to add on to that.
Just that if they get converted, if he was able to convert them to Christianity, then the argument of don't hurt Christians would be valid, whereas if they're not Christian yet, they wouldn't care.
Right, so there's a little bit of wishful thinking going on there, right? Yeah.
I also think because there's a great loss of Christian land, and if Khan converted to Christianity, then there wouldn't be a problem of losing any Christian land.
Okay. So let's actually get into the actual words. So let's look at the letter, right? And reminder, please do bring hard copy of this to class if you don't have it next time, right? So one of the things I suggested you do was circle or at least identify specific words or ideas. So does anything stand out in the Pope making this argument, right? Of, hey, I'm the leader of the Christian world, the Christendom, there's truth that I know, but what is the basis on which the Pope seeks to make his case? Is there any particular phrase or idea that stands out to you? That the Pope articulates that he thinks should be convincing to the cause? Is there any particular idea? Yeah, media.
There's a part that says all men should live united in comfort in the fear of God.
Where do you see this?
It is on page 20 in
Yeah.
the middle of the second paragraph.
Middle of the second letter. Would you mind reading that sentence aloud?
Let's see. We therefore, following the example of the King of Peace, and desiring that all men should live united in concord with fear of God, do admonish, beg, and earnestly beseech all of you that for the future you desist entirely from assaults of this kind, and especially from the persecution of Christians, and that after so many and such grievous offenses you conciliate by a fitting penance the wrath of divine majesty.
Which without doubt you have seriously aroused, right, by your wanton violence. By the way, just so that we're on the same page, who is the King of Peace that is being referred to here?
Is it God or the actual king?
And specifically, who in the Christian? What?
Jesus?
Jesus, right? Prince of Peace, King of Peace, right? That's the term that comes out in the Christian scripture. So here, right, actually one of the terms that come out is, it's not just a vague, there's a God, and I know God, so you should follow me, but there's this Prince of Peace, right? There's this Jesus figure that we can follow, that we follow in that footsteps, and we should stop killing. Any other particular phrase or idea that stands out in the way that the Pope makes the case? Yeah.
Kind of like salvation
Where do you see that?
in like the last kind of couple lines.
Yes.
Like it says that if they neglect to humble themselves of their own accord, he may not only no longer put off the punishment of the wicked
And how do you connect that to salvation? What do you
So like, so if you become Christian and you like kind of praise God, He will forgive you for what you have done in this life and will let you live on to the next.
Yeah, in fact, not only that, right? In fact, if you don't stop and convert, things will get really bad for you, right? That you could be, in fact, accruing negative credit in the world to come, as it were. Absolutely. Anything else? Jordan, did you have your hand up?
I was just gonna say he's being like really condescending throughout, like kind of saying, I know about this afterlife that you might not know about.
Yeah.
But you know there might not be anyone on earth right now that can stop you. But like in the afterlife, if you keep killing Christians, there's gonna be problems.
So there's like a kind of a slight acknowledgement of the reality in this current world, but saying that, haha, you think you might be having the upper hand in this world, but you're going to wait and see. Absolutely. So the other thing that I would mention, at the very end of the first letter, so this is on the top of that same page, page 20, we're sending you these friars. And we're sending you these friars where we believe they would be of greater help to you, seeing that they follow the humility of our Savior. If we have thought that ecclesiastical prelates or other powerful men would be more profitable and more acceptable to you, we would have sent them. Rather saying that we're sending humble men to show our humility, although kind of sounds like a little bit like a cop-out to me, because probably bishops and other high church officials didn't want to get killed in this dangerous mission. But actually, what I really wanted to get was right after that, the top of the first letter, right? So, actually, could someone start reading the start of the letter? I'll stop. Could someone start reading? We're starting with the seeing that. Sure, there.
Seeing that not only men, but even irrational animals made of very elements which go to make up the world machine, are united by a certain innate law after the manner of the celestial spirits, it is not without cause that we are driven to express in strong terms our amazement that you, as we have heard, have invaded many countries belonging to both Christians and to others, who are laying them waste in a horrible desolation, and with a fury still unabated, you do not cease from stretching out your disjoined hand to more distant lands, but breaking the bond of natural ties, bearing neither sex nor age, your rage against all indiscriminately with the sword of
chastisement. That's great. Thank you. So, what is the argument that the Pope is making there? Or what is he basing his case, the larger case of please don't kill us, please stop invading us? What are the principles he's relying on there in those passages? Yeah.
The con goes against nature.
Sorry?
He says that the con goes against nature, the basic laws of nature.
The basic laws of nature. Have you guys encountered this idea anywhere else before? What does it mean? What do you think he means? That breaking bonds of natural ties, or we are united by a certain innate law. Has anyone encountered this idea? Anywhere?
From like the Enlightenment period, with like when they were writing the Declaration of Independence and stuff, they were kind of using that idea. But I think
We hold it self-evident.
Yeah, but I think he's talking about like a different innate law here that they were.
What do you think the difference is?
Well, later on, obviously, is like life, liberty, and property. Back then, like I don't think they had like that same ideals. Maybe life.
What do you think is the basis of the nature or the law of nature that the Pope is talking about?
I'm not sure. Maybe just their right to like live. The
Okay.
Christians in the areas that they're invading.
Right to live.
So like right after the code breaking the bond of natural ties, it says sparing neither sex nor age. So I guess it's more like not killing women and not killing children of young age.
Yeah. Okay. So basic human decency, maybe, which connects to maybe life, right? So in some sense, actually, I'm glad you brought up the Enlightenment because it's not unrelated, right? So Enlightenment ideas, that sense of natural rights, human rights, is on the one hand secular, and maybe you can say that these ideas here that the Pope is articulating is based on more religious, right, ideas. But in some sense, the Enlightenment idea actually draws back to this European tradition of natural law, right, natural law. And originally this comes out of the Christian tradition, the basis that sort of all of humanity, whether one is Christian or not, that there's a sense that certain truths should be self-evident, right, to all people, regardless of the religion that they follow. And so in some sense, the Pope is making not just a claim based on Christianity here, but perhaps seeing that he's dealing with a not a Christian leader, claiming, sort of saying that, hey, you should recognize, right, these sort of things. All right, enough on the Pope. What struck you about the way that the Khan responds to the Pope's begging at Michael?
Well, for starters, his interpretation of so-called God's intent seems to radically differ from the message that the Pope is trying to send, because the Pope is saying, well, it's against God's will for you to be invading all these Christian countries, but he's saying that it's the fact that I've invaded all these countries successfully that it means that God is probably on my side when I'm doing this.
Do you see a particular line that articulates that the best?
Yeah, if you look in the second paragraph of the letter, towards Ivan, it says, like thy words, they were also impudent, they were proud, and they slew our messenger emissaries. How can anyone seize or kill by his own power contrary to the command of God?
How can I do it otherwise, right? Yeah, Cameron, do you have that?
Yeah, it's similar. He thinks that he has the permission from God to kill people if they don't follow him.
Okay. Yeah.
It also struck me that instead of acknowledging that everything's been wrong, they actually asked the Christians to come and serve them or speak to them. It's very simplistic.
So not only will I not stop killing and invading your territories, you should come and serve us. Well, who should come and serve him specifically?
I guess it says all the princes, so all the high figures at the end of page 21. Or yourself, actually. Sorry.
Yourself, right? Thou thyself, at the head of all the princes, come at once to serve and wait upon us, right? So the Pope himself, right here, right? The prince of is the head of the Christendom. You should come to, in this case, I guess, Karakorum in Central Asia and to serve us. Absolutely. So in some sense, turning everything upside down, right? God is on my side, which is why I've been able to invade all the way down to Europe and kill you all. And so you should come, right? Anything else that struck you yeah?
The Mongols seem highly skeptical that they didn't seem to believe the same structure as far as they didn't seem to believe that what the Pope was considering as God or as divine was correct.
Yeah.
But they seem to believe their own beliefs were better.
Yeah.
Making sense.
Yeah.
There's a paragraph where they say, I'm finding right now, but where he said, he basically said there's no guarantee that me becoming Christian is the right thing to do.
Does anybody else see that particular passage? Yeah, Michael?
Yeah, if you look at the third paragraph, it mentions, how knowest thou whom God absolves in truth, to whom he shows mercy? How dost thou know that such words as thou speakest are with God's sanction? He's trying to say, you might be saying that you're trying to relay the message of God, but how can we actually tell that you're actually supposed to be the representative of God?
Absolutely, right? He's actually coming back with a fairly sharp critique, even a philosophical critique, one might say, of on what basis are you claiming God's knowledge and God's authority, right? In fact, isn't the sort of the evidence, the balance of evidence on my side? Why, if God is real and if God is truly sort of in control of things, doesn't the fact that I was able to do the show, as you were saying earlier, right, that God is on my side? Anything else? Yeah.
I don't know much about Mongol religion, but this whole letter seems to acknowledge that whatever God they have is maybe the same God. He acknowledges their God and says that they're on our side, even though he's not Christian on the side.
So they're assuming different structures, but they seem to actually also share this idea that, well, there is this kind of divine being who sort of is on somebody's side, right? Who does, yeah, absolutely. Do you get any other sense of like what the Mongol or what the Khan's understanding of religion is like? Does he seem like he has any familiar with Christianity of any sort? This is a very tiny point. Does he make any reference to Christians? Yeah.
Well, I think there's something about Christians because like when he's giving his like sharp critique of he said that I should become a trembling Nestorian Christian. That's kind of specific.
Yeah, thou likewise sayest that I should become a trembling Nestorian Christian, worship God and be an ascetic. How knowest thou the God of self-loath? Right? That's the preceding one. Has anybody heard of Nestorians? Nestorianism? Anywhere? No? In your AP European history? No? So Nestorianism is a very early form of one of the early branches of Christianity, considered from sort of the Roman Church's perspective to be a heretical group. They have a lot of different debates about sort of the nature of Jesus and how human or how divine he was, things like that. The church divided in very different ways from very early on, but Nestorians, there's records that suggest that they reached as far as China very early on in the sort of late centuries of the first millennium. So in fact, there were already small communities of certain branches of Christianity already at that, right? So in some sense, the Mongols, whereas the opposite wasn't true, right? There is no Confucian, school in Europe at this point, right? So the Mongols have some familiarity with some form of Christianity, or at least he's betraying it there. So let's get to that big question before we move on. What do these two letters say about the ways in which these two figures see how the world is basically organized and where they are in the world? We already kind of retraced this, but this is just to make sure that we're on the same page. How do they see the world hierarchy or world order being based on? And where are they? Yeah, there.
Well, usually the Pope, like being the head of the church, he's usually like the one who calls most of like the shots in Europe, and like he's kind of like who the princes look up to for power, for like anything.
Or at least spiritually or nominally speaking, right? Yeah.
But then with the Mongols kind of just taking over most of the known world at that point, he sees like they fear that he'll just continue, and the Mongol leader sees himself as the person of power, as the one who will, like he has the authority to just conquer everything,
Yeah.
just own everything.
Yeah, absolutely.
It seems like both people, like the Pope and Khan, they both like acknowledge or think that there's a God, like above them, but then they like both put themselves as like the person right below God.
Right. So the Pope, right, in fact, comes to be known precisely as Christ's vicar on the earth, right? Christ's representative, right, to all the people, which is the source of authority. And in a similar way, it seems like Khan seems to actually, right, imply that his power, his conquest, the fact that he is the great Khan, puts him, in some sense, sort of above everybody else, right? The ruler of the world. That's why you should come to service. So this is an instance of two sort of competing visions of where the center of the world is colliding, right? And how the world is being organized. And of course, it's perhaps understandable for that the Mongols would feel this way if you look at the orange area, which is, right, the height of Mongol conquest across Eurasia. Now, again, on Tuesday we looked at how the Indian Ocean world is being connected, right, by traders and by Islam. But the Mongols, in some sense, is the one who really connects after the fall of Rome and the Tang Empire in China. Right, the Mongols are, in some sense, the ones who make the land bridge, right, across the vast Eurasia. Now, after Genghis Khan dies, who is the one who sort of starts out this process of Mongols moving across the steppe, his descendants, his immediate descendants, sort of on the one hand continue to their conquest, right? So all the way up to Northern Europe, to the Balkans, to, in fact, into what is now Turkey, Iraq, right? They famously invade and destroy the city of Baghdad. So it's in fact, from non-Mongol perspective, right? Whether you're a European or Arab or Persian, this Mongol invasion, right, is this massive traumatic experience. But in the wake of it, there emerges this kind of stability. So, and in fact, it's not just that they sort of connect, but right? So Kublai Khan, who is, I believe, another one of Genghis's grandson, takes over, tries to take over as a great Khan, but really what he becomes is an emperor of China, right? He sets up basically a Mongol dynasty, the Yuan dynasty, and sets up a capital in present-day Beijing, right? And in that process, and they do this by conquering the Song dynasty, China. In that process, especially the Yuan dynasty Mongols become Sinified, right? A cult becomes sort of adopts Chinese culture, Chinese bureaucracy, and so forth. And so perhaps it is understandable that people like Marco Polo, right, who is traveling through, right from Venice, across land, across the Silk Road to Kambalik, or what is now Beijing, under Yuan dynasty from the late 1200s into the early 1300s. Perhaps it's understandable that he sort of calls sort of Chinese and Mongol sort of interchangeably, right? And he is the contemporary of the second reading that you did, the traveling to China. So let's open that one out, please. And by the way, so on this map right here, the red line is the route that Marco Polo took. The green line, incidentally, is the route that Ibn Battuta, the great, is he Arab? Moroccan traveler, right, made across Eurasia as well. And Battuta makes it all the way to China, right, by sea. So great journeys are being made by Europeans as well as non-Europeans. But this travel, right, this passage that you read is by an Italian contemporary, right, of Marco Polo, who talks about what it's like to travel from across Central Asia. He starts in Astrakhan. The passage starts in Astrakhan, and Astrakhan is right here, right? So right by the Caspian Sea. This will be present-day Russia, I guess, right by the Ural Mountains. So, what impression do you get? What is it like to travel as an European across Eurasia in this wake of Mongol conquest? What does it seem to be? What kind of a journey does it seem to be?
It alternates between like short periods, well not short periods, fair periods of like, okay, so it's like mostly safe in this area. And it's like, this area is safe unless they just switched Khans, in which case you'll probably die.
Or be detained
for
a while.
But they did say that there was a good chance that you would end up getting killed in that area. And then like there were some areas where it's like, this is dangerous unless you have a large caravan. So like it kind of, you know, shifted over the course of the journey. You know, you had to take different approaches in different areas.
So you sense both stability and instability.
Yeah.
How about others? What struck you more, stability or instability, and what specific sort of things stood out to you?
Perhaps I just had the wrong idea of how history was back then, but it struck me that it was pretty stable. It seemed to have like a structure. Like if you died and you had a brother, they just give the stuff to your brother and you take it home, rather than you just getting killed along the way.
So, if you die at the right place, maybe, with the right people, if you have a brother with you, perhaps, possibly, right? I mean, and Marco Polo famously traveled with his father. Maybe there's some recourse. That maybe there's some kind of law in place that you can actually appeal to, right? So you won't lose everything, essentially. Yeah, Michael.
I got a general sense that it was like relatively safe throughout most of the path. Like at the very last page, it says that all the path from Atana to Sarai is the least safe. But even with like 60 people, he said that's as safe as if you were traveling in your own home, if not more Mongol military who are there to basically make sure that everything goes along fine.
Okay, so maybe he feels that the Mongol, certainly, if you have 60 people with you, you'll be all set, right? Some of them armed, some of them not armed. But maybe Mongol soldiers present help. What did others get in terms of are Mongol soldiers good thing, bad thing, in your general sense?
Well, this like one line sort of confused me.
Yeah.
On page 356.
Yes.
He says that from Utara, I can't pronounce that.
Utrar.
Utrar
Yeah.
and to
Al-Malik.
Al-Malik.
Yeah.
It is like 45 days by passes, and you meet Mongols every day. But I don't
Yes.
know if that's like a good thing or a bad thing.
Matthew, you were shaking your head.
Yeah, I don't think the presence of the soldiers is a good thing. There's a note on the bottom of the first page,
Yes.
50, that actually says that it's not an indication of the security of the road.
What is it an indication of?
The opposite, like they would get taxes, I'm guessing? I'm not sure.
Yeah, for extortions made
Yeah.
along the way by Mongols, right? In other words, what?
Bribes?
Bribe, they're asking, right? So these soldiers are asking for a bribe for safekeeping, to pass through certain areas, so forth, right? So, and in fact, the letter advises you to carry a certain amount of money so that you can pay off people so that bad things don't happen to you. So maybe there's a little bit of both, right? There protection, maybe, there's certainly, there's certain kind of authority, but and this happens, right, to this day. I mean, you have to, sometimes in certain contexts, have to pay off some official, right, police or otherwise. So there's an indication of that. What was I going to say? So what is the impression that you get from this European's perspective of China? What is it like? What is being traded? What kind of places do you feel like China is? Or do you get any sort of sense of that? Maybe we'll start out with a factual question. What is being traded? What do you see being traded in this country? Yeah.
Seem the Europeans are trading mostly silver.
Silver to
Like, they're giving it.
they're bringing silver,
Yeah.
right? Absolutely. And what are they trading it into first? Yeah, Jordan.
It says on page like 358 that they buy like silk and other merchandise that you may want to buy. But like mainly he mentions silk.
Yeah, so silk is a big thing. So there's a commodity. Is there something that comes in between silk and silver that you mentioned? Yeah.
I think it mentioned somewhere that they have to like give all their money to the Lord of Cafe, and then he gives them paper money.
This is, for example, you see that in page 356, at the middle paragraph, right? With the money you get from the silver somi, you have sold, that is with paper money, and so forth, right? So there's actually a sophisticated currency system that seems to be in place, right? And in fact, I'll ask you this: does the paper money seem to be a good thing or a bad thing?
Well, they do mention that it's required to be accepted throughout the country. So it definitely seems to be valid, valuable currency.
It's legal tender, right? And in fact, let me see if I can find, there's a part that he says that, surprise, surprise, you don't get cheated with the paper money, right? Base treasury to the merchants. All the people of the country, this is the very last page, are bound to accept it, and yet they do not pay more for merchandise, although it is paper money. As if, right, he sounds a little bit surprised, as if, wow, things can work this way. Right? Yeah, Matthew.
I don't quite remember if I saw it here, but it would make sense that the somi is less heavy than the silver, and that actually.
The paper money you mean?
Yeah,
yeah.
That'd be pretty beneficial since they're traveling on like horses and donkeys. So.
Absolutely. It's kind of like traveling to a different country where you find a payment system that is like more efficient. I don't know if you've ever had that experience traveling to a different country. You feel like, oh wow, this way of like buying things make a lot more sense, or wow, this is really screwed up. Has anybody felt? So every time I go to Japan, because I'm from Japan, I research Japan, basically to this day, I go to the ATM and draw out like what is like the equivalent of like $500. And I would never carry $500 in a wallet in the U.S. But in Japan, there's still like places that like it's still a very cash-based place, and it's just the way it is, right? It's not that big places don't accept credit cards. It's just people are used to cash, and you're used to carrying cash, right? Maybe this is, especially if you're an American traveler, you go to Europe. It's getting a little bit better, but for a time, I think it happened last time I was in Paris. You get like kind of embarrassed when you try to shop with your American credit card in Paris. If your American credit card is not a chip card, and if you haven't set up the PIN number on your chip card, what the French waiter or shopkeeper would do is they would frantically search for a pen and be like, "What is wrong with you? But you have to sign this thing," right? Because it's all pin pushing things and things like that. There's a little bit of that going on here, right? They're encountering a sort of, in some sense, an advanced economy, advanced society. And you get less of this impression maybe in this particular writing, but for example, in Marco Polo's writing, there's a sense that, wow, this is a far more populous, and you get a little bit of that in this document, far more advanced society, right? That there is a sense that in a real sense, not just militarily like we saw in the two letters, there's a sense that economically, culturally, even technologically, China seems to be at the center of the world. Now, this kind of situation breaks down. Well, actually, before it breaks down, so it's not just that China is advanced. There's something about the 14th century world that exacerbates this. Do you notice anything on this table that I have up here that might also give us a sense of why people are in different places? Yes, Gary?
The Black Plague.
The Black Plague. What does that do? It kills lots of Europeans, right? 1300s, absolutely. So whereas, right, Asia is growing slightly, there is apparently good enough figures for the Islamic world, but for example, places like Japan, yay, right, increasing. I think it's also partly because at this period in Japanese history, it's relatively peaceful and no civil war going on. But yeah, Black Plague, and it's ironically, it's one of the results of the Eurasian unity that the Mongols established, right? People, things, rats, travel across Eurasia over the sea, right? So it kind of starts out in Asia, but then travels to Europe, into the Mediterranean world, and kills lots and lots and lots of people, right? And this is a hugely traumatic experience, 14th century, for Europe, and in fact for the broader Mediterranean world as a whole. So, in the wake of this, the Mongol Empire gradually breaks down. And Europe, at first, is kind of, right, is traumatized by this experience, it's fragmented. But there's some move towards countries, smaller countries, right, combining into larger countries. So, in the Iberian Peninsula, you see the process of what is known as Reconquista, right, reconquest of small Christian kingdoms starting in the north, reconquering territories, conquering countries that had been under Islamic control, right, for a few hundred years, to the point where you have the kingdom of Castile and Aragon, quite famously, Ferdinand of Aragon and Isabella of Castile joining and forming Spain, and Portugal also becomes its own kingdom by this time. Later on, you start to see sort of even larger sort of empire, actually, right, on the European continent. So perhaps the most famous of this is Holy Roman Empire under Charles V, who comes from the Habsburg dynasty, right? And in this context, it eventually breaks up, but the Habsburgs not only is nominally the emperor of the Holy Roman Empire, right, what is the greater area of present-day Germany and beyond, this controls what is now Austria, Czech Republic, Slovakia, etc., and Spain. So it's a sort of this massive political, or at least dynastic empire, right? And then, but in other parts of the world, actually, did I skip? Yeah. You also see consolidation, and Professor Ayer talked about how there are these empires that emerge out of, sorry, I cut out the map accidentally. Kingdoms like the Ottoman Empire, the Safavid dynasty, right, in Persia, and the Mughal Empire in South Asia. So it's sort of out of the ashes of the Mongol Empire that different sort of, especially in Central Asia to Middle East, there's these territorial empires that emerge. European countries are sort of beginning to emerge a little bit in a more fragmented way. But I want to spend the rest of our time really in China today. And so the Chinese dynasty that overthrows the Mongols, the Yuan dynasty, is the Ming dynasty, which is which is led by ethnically Han Chinese, and so in some sense kicking out the Mongol dynasty. And it's this Ming dynasty that not only establishes sort of Han control, but in fact sees itself as a kind of resurging power. And one of the greatest example of this, and forgive my pronunciation of Chinese names, but Zheng He is a Chinese admiral who goes on this expedition, multiple expedition, right, from 1405 through 1433, that takes him literally across the Indian Ocean world, right? In some sense, the opposite of the way that Islam travels, reaching all the way to what is now Tanzania, so places like Zanzibar, Malindi, right? Famously bringing back giraffe back to the emperor in China, which is seen as a very auspicious animal. But right, with these massive ships that, and this is sort of one at least model scale of, this is Columbus's Santa Maria, little tiny cute little ship here, right? And this is one of Zheng He's ships, apparently, right? These massive ships with armies and so forth on top of it. But the Chinese don't really establish colonies, right? What they seem to be establishing is sort of contacts, trade, and nominally sort of letting people know that there is this emperor in China who you should come to bring tribute to and acknowledge as the son of heaven. But there are other things going on. So it's the Ming Dynasty China becomes the center of what many economic historians believe are the first global economy. And this happens sort of through a convergence of different things, right? So you have the Spanish and Portuguese Empire, so right, Spain and Portugal emerges not only as a kind of power that reconquers the Iberian Peninsula, but they quickly go beyond it, right? Very famously. So 1492, Columbus sails the ocean blue, right? And there is this emerging global empire. So the red is the Spanish and blue is the Portuguese, and we talked a little bit about them coming to Goa right here on the Malabar coast. We'll talk a little bit more about Macau. But one of the key developments after the Spanish and Portuguese establishment, especially the Spanish creation of colonies in Latin America, is a discovery of silver mine, right? Especially in the city of Potosi, which is it even on this map? Right here, yeah, in what is now present-day Peru. And also a mercury mine in a place called Huancavelica. So this is a value of imported treasure to Spain from the New World. And there's a huge jump, right, that takes place in the wake of the discovery of Potosi in 1545 and the subsequent discovery of the mercury mine. Now, where does all of this silver go, right? And actually, let me ask you this. Where does all the silver go? To China, right? As we've already seen some traces of it. So this is a map of commodities that's being traded in Ming Dynasty China. Well, by the way, we will put all of these slides up on the course website so you can take a look at it closely and review it for your paper, etc. So why does it go to China, right? Part of it is a Chinese story. It's not just that Europeans are interested in buying Chinese goods, although that's certainly part of it, right? We've already seen that. But there is a shift in China that takes place during this period where silver and gold, to a lesser extent, becomes the basic form of money. And there's a kind of increased scarcity of silver, right, which creates this massive demand, massive hunger for silver in China proper. The Ming Dynasty officials attempt to create a currency, but it fails. And so that, as a result, sort of raises up the value of silver as a kind of natural store of value, right? And you kind of see that this is, so circa 1650, right? China takes up about a third of the planet's population. And this is the silver to gold ratio in 1590 that's listed on the top here. To state the obvious, can someone tell us what is going on with these ratios? Yeah?
There's a lot more silver than there is gold due to Japan and Spain mining it, like, and trade, like, exporting it elsewhere.
And where is silver most valuable?
In China.
In China, right? So there's both a Chinese demand for silver and an ongoing European hunger for Chinese goods, right, combined to sort of create this massive flow of people and goods and silver across the Pacific, right, from this side. And there's a kind of connection that's developed across the Pacific. Now, it's not just, though, right, it's worth noting that it's not just a Spanish story. The Spanish aren't the only ones who are moving, right? In fact, part of the silver also comes from Japan, where just right around the same time as Potosi is discovered, there is a massive silver mine that's being discovered in Japan. And Japanese rulers are also interested in Chinese goods. So this is a period where there is an increased hunger among Japan's rulers for Chinese goods, in part because Japan, from the late 1470s onwards, falls into about century plus of civil war. And so different samurai warlords across Japan are competing with each other to gain more wealth, to more economic development, as well as weapons and so forth, right, guns, etc. And so China becomes a major trade hub for these Japanese rulers as well. And so much so that around 1530s, there is a deluge of Japanese ships that show up on a port in Korea and then in China. And there's so much demand that the sort of Ming Dynasty particularly feels threatened or feels a little bit anxious about the Japanese monopolizing all the goods that is coming out of China. But more generally, you see Japanese traders actually moving into Southeast Asia, establishing little Japan towns in what is now, as far as what is now Thailand, right, for example, or what is now Indonesia. In the same period that the Spanish is establishing its base in Manila, right, for the first time. And so there's a major trans-Pacific link that is being created. That connects to a regional network, right, that connects China, Japan, other parts of Asia as well. And so in general, the Ming rulers are concerned about this development. On the one hand, they're happy enough that trade is happening as long as it's orderly, but things aren't always orderly. The Japanese traders who are sent by different samurai warlords, for example, fight with each other. In China, for example, there's a competition between the Spanish and the Portuguese, right? There's this general sense of disquiet. And so the Ming government tries to, from time to time, ban foreign trade completely. But that oftentimes only leads to increasing smuggling activity and piracy in sort of the sea around China. And one of the major phenomena that emerges as a result of this is this phenomenon known as Japanese pirates, or woko. But in reality, historians sense that it's actually a combination of Japanese, Korean, Chinese people who are typically traders or fishermen who are living on the coast, kind of combining to create this network of smuggling and piracy, right, during this period in response to official ban on trade. And we'll get to more of this, I believe, next week. But it's not, there are other Europeans as well. We'll especially get to the British, and the English East India Company. But the Spanish are there, the Portuguese are there. The Dutch start to show up from the late 16th century, especially once you get into the 17th century. They're not only in Asia, but they go to the New World, create New Amsterdam, what's now New York. They trade with the natives, Native Americans there, primarily trying to buy fur. But they make an aggressive push into Asia from the 1600s onwards. So they attack Portuguese outposts in what is now the island of Taiwan, establishes its own fort there, establish themselves in what is now Indonesia, and tries to get in on this sort of trade network, right, that is emerging in East Asia. And oftentimes fighting other Europeans, right, in order to gain an upper hand. So this, in some sense, this instability is part of what feeds to the fall of Ming Dynasty China, which is taken over by China's last imperial dynasty, the Qing Dynasty. And the Qing Dynasty is yet another non-Han group, the Manchus, right, in northeastern China, who conquer the Ming. And this regime lasts very long, right, until 1911, well into the 20th century. We will get to that story later on in this semester. But sort of see, whereas the Ming rulers try to control Western trade, initially the Qing rulers sort of try to expand it, allow for other more Europeans to come, including Americans eventually. But what they do is ultimately limit the trade, especially from 1745, 1757, which is by that time, the emperor is Qianlong Emperor, whose letter we'll talk about shortly. They limit Europeans to the city of Canton or Guangzhou, right, in southern China, right here, which is very close to where Macau is, right, where the Portuguese had already established their trading colony. And a system of trade that emerges there becomes known as the Canton system. This is an image of the port city of Canton, I think circa 1800s, right when Macartney is coming. Now, we'll talk about more in this letter. The foreigners, Europeans, tend to complain about the fact that they're confined in Canton, but throughout the 18th century, throughout 1700s and into 1800s, trade expands steadily, right? So they're getting something out of it steadily. And again, sort of the cast of European characters expand. The Manchus, in some sense, are happy to have this trade as long as they're, again, under control, right? And nothing is causing instability. And maybe there's a sense that Manchus, being a people from northeastern China in the frontier, are used to dealing with different kinds of what they, again, would call barbarians, right? And let's think about that term a little bit. But this is what I want to do in the half an hour that we have left as we get into Macartney, the story of Macartney's embassy. actually opened the instruction to Lord Macartney first, which is a slightly longish writing that he had, written by Henry Dundas, who was at that time the Secretary of Home Affairs. He becomes later the Lord Admiral. He's one of the leading bureaucrats of Great Britain. What seems to be, at least according to, obliquely, this document describes the status quo, right? The Canton trade as it existed. What seems to be the main items that are being traded here? Yeah, there, Gareth.
It seems like his plan is just to trade British textiles and bullion for Chinese herb.
And what is the Chinese herb? What is that?
Is it the opium?
No,
Or is that later on?
Tea, exactly. Tea. Tea is the Chinese herb. Tea is the #1 commodity, right? Silk is still important, porcelain is still important, but increasingly tea is becoming something that's British, right? For the first time in history. Now we associate tea with the British, but in fact, this is a period when the British in fact began to drink tea for the first time. And what is bullion?
I think that would be just like silver or gold.
Absolutely, right? And that's usually not refined yet, right? Not turned into corn yet, right? In chunks, in pieces. So tea is being traded for silver and other manufactured goods, possibly. What seems to irk the British about the status quo of the Canton trade? Are they unhappy about anything in particular? Yeah.
So in Canton, the goods that they get are far from the ships on the shore, so it's difficult for them to carry all the goods from the warehouses to the shore.
So there seems to be some kind of logistical difficulty, maybe also having to do with the fact that they're, right, I mean, they're kind of like allowed to come in at the very southern end of China, right, at this very end, right? So maybe they're certainly not allowed to go farther inland, right? It's part of the complaint. Any other things that they seem to be unhappy about? Mike?
It seems to think that the trade in Canton seems to be really unfair because, like, on the second page, the second paragraph, it mentions that, like, because they're only allowed to trade in that one city, the fair competition is, quote, destroyed by associations of the Chinese. Like, they're not able to, like, attain fair prices because they're limited to trading in that one city.
Scarcely compatible with the regulations of civilized society, right? It's not just unfair, it's uncivilized, right? This whatever influence that is being alleged of Chinese traders. So there's a sense that they're getting something out of it, but they could get more, right, if things were right.
They also said something about wanting protection, which I wasn't sure if they meant like making sure the prices were right, or if there was a threat to them.
Sorry, what?
If there was a threat to them, like physical protection.
So there seems to be just some kind of sense of insecurity, right? Whether is it protection, right? Do they want security from bribery, corruption, unfair trade practices, or are they literally afraid of being raided by different people? It's a little bit unclear, right? But there seems to be a general sense of insecurity. So what is Macartney tasked with? How is he asked to remedy this situation?
Basically, they just want him to develop like friendly ties with China and hopefully kind of wear down their regulations a little bit until they can expand more into China.
So build a beachhead of negotiation and relationship.
They wanted to sit on the emperor's court and like look after the British government.
How so?
So
What is the mechanism that is being envisioned, ideally speaking?
creating like an embassy.
Creating an embassy, absolutely. Creating, right, a reciprocal diplomatic ties, right? In fact, right, and we'll talk about it, but the Chinese emperor is also invited to send his own embassy, right, to the court of St. James, that is the British capital. Anything else that Macartney maybe want to try to get out of this embassy?
He wanted like an island off the coast.
More territories, right? More places that you know, we're not going to settle soldiers there. We just want a place to put our warehouse, maybe, you know, for peaceful purposes, etc., right? But more, yeah.
And also it says like on the way there's other small cities in like Japan that you can also like try to improve trade with.
They might have better tea, right? is even the suggestion that you might want to connect to China, you might want to connect to what is now Vietnam, right, Cochin, China. So there's a sense that, okay, generally get to know the area, generally make connections, but try to establish an embassy, try to maybe get some kind of territorial concession. This is what I want to do actually in the next 5 minutes or so, and then come together for the last 10 minutes. Divide into a group of 7. I think we have all 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. Divide into 2 groups of 7. Quickly. One come here in this corner, the other group go to the back corner there. And I will give you an instruction. Bring your readings with you. So, the group towards the front of the room, you are George III. And since there are 7 of you, I want you to come up with 7 sentences that paraphrases the key points of George's letter. Right? So what we'll do is when we come back together, each of you will take a line. Right? And so this group right here, come up with 7 lines, 7 key lines from that, and paraphrase, right? In contemporary terms, right? So come up with like the tone. Think about not just the message, but the tone, right? And if you were George III, in your own words, how would you make sort of the 7 key points? In a similar way, you're Chenlo, right? So come up with 7 key points, key sentences that each of you, right, will take a turn speaking in your own words, right? So paraphrase with thinking about the tone that Chenlo might have. In his response to George. You might want to sit down or at least get in circle together so that you can talk.
So we're moving on to the letters, the king sent to him.
Yeah, so look at the letters, right? So you guys look at George's letters and come up and find sort of 7 points, right? And each of you will speak that line, the 7 lines. So we'll try to get that done in about 5 minutes, and we'll come back as a group. Okay? George III, Shenlong. Well, it's actually quite a bit. There's a lot in there. There's instructions. I have a PDF also.
While reading the letter, I felt like there's all these things, and by the way this is all happening, versus he's not like, can this happen?
I get the sense that he is asking, but he's trying to also convey that he's also important in his own way, because I feel like the Emperor of China might not really care about him. So he's trying to be like, hey, I'm asking you this, but just so you know, I'm also a big deal to whoever.
Yeah, I think he expects the China to kind of go along with what he's saying.
Yeah, I think it's your response, but it was a letter was talking about how like this would be beneficial, about how like the British are simple as things opposed to like create this mutual beneficial relationship. People spend like 2 paragraphs describing the credentials of the ambassadors that he talked to.
Yeah, like that means nothing.
Yeah.
And the sentence could be short, right? Could be super short.
I'm gonna say he claims that like the expansion is just for knowledge, like their motivation is just to gain knowledge. So it's not even economic.
No, it's just for printing and like.
Yeah, I'll do that.
Basically, it's just long paragraph.
wrap up in about a minute or two. So why don't we stand up and confront, the two groups should confront one another, face each other. And this, by the way, is the image of, it's a little bit hard to see. This right here is McCartney kneeling in front of Qianlong. It was an issue because McCartney didn't want to kowtow in front of the emperor, sort of go completely prostrate, and so this was a little bit of a compromise apparently. But this is the image, contemporary, I think, based on the drawing maybe of one of McCartney's embassy members. But the letters, right? So McCartney carries George's letter to Qianlong, and Qianlong responds. So let's start with George. Speak to Qianlong.
Alright, we come in good faith and bear gifts to show respect for the Chinese emperor.
Our expansion into China is primarily to exchange knowledge between China and Great Britain above all economic and territorial interests.
With your first sent you the best possible method we can.
Also, we hope to have an embassy in China, and we can also send and create an embassy in Britain.
We would like an island off your coast in order to establish a warehouse and better trade between our two great empires.
Also the last.
Oh, okay. It would be wise to accept this offer, as we will offer you access to our arts and sciences and ensure that our citizens do not commit any crimes.
And given the points we have enumerated, we believe this is a fair request as it will improve communication between the two countries and improve market exchange.
Okay, fair, reasonable request. Qianlong, what do you say to George?
Your envoy was very humble and respectful. I would very much appreciate that.
But we cannot entertain your request because they go against the usages of our dynasty for 5 different reasons.
One, the Canton embassy is too far away.
The second one would be that your ambassador would not be able to go to and from China.
We can't alter our long-standing dynastic traditions just to fit your requests.
Sorry, can you say that a little louder? I couldn't hear you. We don't. Okay.
The last reason is that if we were to grant your request, other nations will follow your bad example and that will put us into persecution.
Okay. So have a seat. Thank you, Qianlong's and George's. So how would you characterize the tone of the letters? What stood out to you in either of the two letters in terms of the tone? Especially even in comparison to the letters that we saw earlier. Yeah.
Qianlong's piece, though, was very they seemed almost surprised by how respectful they had been, and then they were like, but very hard no in response. It was a very hard pass. It was like, wow, you were very humble and kind, and
come so far from so far away.
Yeah, you've come so far. Thank you very much, but absolutely not.
No. Right? Okay. Others.
It starts pretty respectable, but pretty quickly it also turns really condescending. When you go into the different reasons that he lists for why he turned down those requests, for example, number 3, he starts referring to England and other barbarian lands that want to establish an embassy here. He refers to them as barbarian merchants and barbarian citizens.
Yes. This is on the right. This towards the end. Your England, exactly that line. is not the only nation trading in Canton. Your little England almost starts to sound a little bit like, oh, little England, right? In fact, there's right after that, he says, nevertheless, I do not forget the lonely remoteness of your island, cut off from the world by intervening wastes of sea. I mean, shade. I literally wrote shade on the margins, right? I mean, it's not subtle stuff going on. Anything else that struck you? Yeah, like.
I found King George's letter to be both. I mean, he was pretty respectful of the emperor,
Yes.
but at the same time, he was trying to come across as important also, as far as like he can bring stuff to the emperor that he may not know or he may not have, or like improve China in some way.
So you felt like he was humble, but he was also trying to show his strength?
Yes.
What, is there any particular example of strength that you noticed?
There's a point. There are points where he mentioned like communication of art, science, and observation, and like industrial ingenuity of like Great Britain and stuff.
Yeah. Anyway, yeah, media.
I also felt with King George's letter, he was trying to stray away from the fact that it was mainly for trade reasons. He was trying to bring in the science and like the arts and stuff like that to try to draw away from the fact that it was just mainly about trade, what he wanted in the first place.
Yeah, we're here for knowledge and right. We're I don't know. We're not thinking about lowly things like money and you know, and that's definitely not conquest, right? Yeah, Michael.
He also spends a significant amount of time trying to build like credentials of one, the British Empire, and two, the people that he's sending. Like the entire like second paragraph is just talking about how like England used to be at war and now we're like at peace and trying to form all these different connections. And he spends all this time talking about how his like ambassador has all these high positions, like graduate from Oxford. If China even knows what Oxford is in the 17th century.
Indeed, and he refers to McCartney as his cousin, which I'm pretty sure is not true. I think McCartney was like an Irish, Scottish aristocrat. But he builds him up, right? So there's that. So do you sense, does George leave anything out in his letter? Is there anything that you feel like, thinking back to other history classes that you learned, or even from today's readings, even from McCartney's instructions, what is George pointing down?
His desire to expand his empire.
The fact that British Empire is expanding,
Yeah.
right? Where is it expanding?
Like 17th century, I would imagine like Asia and Africa, like basically.
Not quite Africa yet, but
Into
into
India.
India, right? India is right, and specifically on the instruction to McCartney, like keep India on the down low, right? Just don't make a big deal out of it. Yeah.
He also doesn't mention all the like sketchy opium
Yes, opium.
trading.
What opium, right? We will begin to get more into opium next week and in the following weeks as well. It is less of a thing now, or at least they're trying to play it down, right? In fact, McCartney is instructed to acquiesce to Chinese request if the Chinese request that they stop shipping opium. Say, okay, well, stop selling it officially. You know, we'll let others do it for us. Anything else you feel like either of them are leaving out or not really kind of acknowledging in its reality?
I think part of the reason why the Chinese emperor gets so harsh after the beginning is while the other passage is very outwardly respectful, it's kind of obvious it's a little disingenuous. It lays it on very hard and makes no acknowledgement of the selfish wants that would go with it, which actually in some ways make it on a second layer worse and kind of more scummy from the outset.
Okay.
For me, when I was reading King George's letter, it felt less of like a letter of him asking rather than telling. Like the emperor, like instead of like, hey, like I plan on doing this and this, it felt more like this is happening. It's sort of like you just have to just let it happen.
There's a little bit of, so you sense a little bit of confidence.
Right.
So, thinking back to Innocent IV and Guib Khan, what do you think are the relative geopolitical positions of these two empires at this point? Or do you get any sense? Who's we're operating from a position of strength. Derek and then Garrett.
So it feels power's kind of shifting back towards Europe rather than Asia.
Okay.
But they both still feel like they're both the more powerful one. I feel.
They both feel that they are the more powerful
right,
one.
Except I
Yeah.
feel George has a little bit more confidence in himself.
Okay.
And
Maybe
due to history, he should be confident.
you feel
At
like
this
that.
point, Britain is stating, because Europe in general is getting more powerful than China, versus China, until that point, China had always been more powerful.
So Britain's certainly on an upward trajectory, right? You see that. We'll get to that point about relative to China. Garrett?
It seems like in both times the Europeans are kind of underestimating like the Chinese or the Eastern view of them. Like they're kind of thinking that they're so used to being so powerful in their own region that when they move out to the outside world, they still expect to be respected in that way. But like to the Chinese emperor, like England is just another European country that's trading with them. Like they're still dealing with the Dutch and all these other guys.
Yeah.
And they don't really mean as much to them as they think they do.
Yeah. We don't need anything from you, right? Is the message. So maybe you sense a little bit of strength actually on the Chinese side. So I think this is a moment where it's worth keeping in mind that we know what happens, but we shouldn't let that color how we see the particular moment in 1792 when McCartney gets there. This is what I want to end with. This is the import-export. This is the value of things that are imported into Canton and exported out of Canton in 1792. So these are things that the British are bringing, or the other Europeans are bringing into Canton, and its value. This is what is being, in the bottom right here, that is being exported out of Canton. What is a problem here from the British or generally European perspective? More exports than imports. There is a trade deficit, right? And that's always been the case, right? The Europeans always wanted more things out of China than the Chinese wanted, vice versa. That's still the case here. And in fact, the Chinese are able to maintain this trade at this point because they're still, right, I mean, Qianlong can say no, 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 and no to all of requests at this point and be fine with it. George III can't force it, even though he is on the